There are 12 big questions that are likely to come up in your Russia exam. Let's start with the first of these. This is a lovely question. What caused the February 1917 revolution, where the Tsar was forced to abdicate? So background information first. The people had been long frustrated with Tsar Nicholas's leadership. Think right back to the 1905 revolution. The economic and military chaos, though, caused by World War I proved to be the last straw. On the 19th of February, bread was rationed, and 4 days later, on International Women's Day, women began to protest, both about the bread rationing but also about the conditions of their husbands and sons who were fighting on the front line. Then workers at the Putilov steel armaments factory went on strike. From the front line, the Tsar, not able to comprehend the seriousness of the discontent, ordered soldiers to put down the protests with force. Officers responded by telling soldiers to shoot at the crowd, which they did. But others saw this as an overreaction, and other soldiers from the Petrograd garrison refused to obey orders, and the sailors at the Kronstadt naval base mutinied. In March, the Tsar was forced to abdicate. He was on a train outside of Petrograd in a place called Pskov, Pskov, and when his brother, the Grand Duke, refused to take on the dynasty, this marked the end of 300 years of Romanov rule. So let's go through the reasons why the February Revolution happened. It is worthwhile for you to create a copy of what I'm showing you, annotated with some of the keywords and statistics. So, why did the February Revolution happen? The main reason was World War I and the repercussions of World War I. So, they expected great victory in World War I. Indeed, the outbreak of World War I was celebrated in Russia. They even called their army a steamroller, as they thought it would just crush all opposition. However, they suffered loss after loss. For example, 70,000 men were killed at Tannenberg, and the general in control, so despairing of the result of the battle, committed suicide. The impact of World War I was felt especially on the railway system, which collapsed as it struggled to take all the soldiers to the battles. This compromised the distribution of food supplies even further, impacting both soldiers and people at home. Now, the Tsar made a massive mistake in September 1950 when he made himself Commander-in-Chief. As Commander-in-Chief of the army, he was held responsible from this point forward for all the losses and mistakes, and indeed the losses were thought to be a direct result of the leadership of the army. For example, 1 in 3 of the troops had no rifles. And because the Tsar was Commander-in-Chief, he was away on the front line, leading Petrograd to be ruled by the Tsarina, Alexandra, and Rasputin. Now, Alexandra was a German, and she was actually considered to be a spy by a number of people within Russia, and she was influenced by Rasputin, who was a mystic, a womanizer, with very little education and lacked the respect of the Russian people. The Tsarina kept changing officials led by the advice of Rasputin, and this left food rotting in trains outside of Petrograd and chaos. So all of this led to a demand for change and the February Revolution. Another major reason for the February Revolution were socio-economic reasons. So 6 out of 10 people in Russia spoke Russian as an additional language. So these ethnic minorities were known as subject nationalities, and they faced Russification, which was prejudice they encountered as they were forced to conform to the Russian culture, the Russian language, and they often had, for example, less powerful jobs and fewer employment opportunities. So they wanted change and demanded new leadership. Another economic reason for the revolution was the backward nature of Russia's economy. So agriculturally, farmers still relied on primitive hand tools and strip farming. Despite attempts to industrialise, the output of factories was still lower than elsewhere in the developed world. So this all contributed to the fact that Russia couldn't cope with the extra demands being made by World War I in the context of having a backwards economy. So that was major in causing discontent, major reason for discontent. Combined with the already backwards economy, the winter of 1916 to 17 was particularly harsh. With all the snow, the trains couldn't run, which further compromised the distribution of food to the soldiers and also to the people at home. The situation was so bad that in February, on the 19th of February 1917, the government for the first time was forced to introduce bread rationing. And this sparked the protest that was seen on International Women's Day. So they are the socio-economic reasons for the revolution. Finally, let's look at the political reasons for the revolution. So the Tsar was an autocrat, which meant he thought he had been given the rule of Russia by God. He was chosen by God and should have absolute control. To this effect, he really compromised efforts towards democracy in Russia and used his secret police, the Okhrana, to control freedoms in Russia. Whilst he was away from Petrograd as Commander-in-Chief, he was told of the bubbling discontent in Petrograd and the beginning of the protests on International Women's Day. But he didn't understand the extremity of the discontent. And on the 26th of February, soldiers, following his orders, which were to put down the disorders by tomorrow, that's what he said, put down the disorders by tomorrow, officers told soldiers to shoot at the protesters, and they did, killing 40. And this caused further frustration, and other soldiers at the Petrograd garrison, for example, said, this isn't right, we shouldn't be firing at these people who are hungry and frustrated at their sons and husbands dying, and they refused to follow orders, they mutinied. And so did the sailors as well. So those orders were one reason for the revolution of 1917. And finally, the Duma were created as a result of the 1905 October Manifesto. They were a move towards democracy in Russia, yet the Tsar, as an autocrat, really compromised the power of the Duma from the outset. He refused to listen to them, he collapsed the Duma at will, and he wouldn't allow fair and free elections to the Duma. Now, right before the Tsar abdicated, in the final days of this revolution, the Duma offered the Tsar a get-out. They sent the Tsar a petition asking for a new cabinet and asking for that cabinet to not be dissolved but to be kept in session to manage the situation. The Tsar refused to compromise and he refused to agree to this petition, and then he basically threw away, in doing this, his final chance to be leader of Russia, and he was forced to abdicate. So here are the main reasons for the February Revolution. If you would like to read about them more, you can do that on page 13 to 15 of your revision guides. And this can be represented in a different way in this revision card here. You'll get a copy of this, and it's all the same information, it's just presented slightly differently. So to help consolidate your understanding of this and command the knowledge to memory, what would be good is if you study the dual coding piece of work you've created, and you initially just follow it through and talk through the reasons why the February Revolution happened. Then once you can do that successfully, you might need to re-listen to the video to be absolutely sure you're doing it right. You turn it over and you see if you can copy down the illustrations, the little icons, and your annotations from memory. And where there's gaps, you can see that by turning it around, just seeing what you've missed. And they're two strategies that really work to embed things into your memory. And that is the end of the first video on the first likely question to come up in your Russia exam.